It was one of the most terrifying and gut-wrenching, horrific days of my life because I love my job. I love what I do. Nobody ever tries to help you and say, there are resources available, there are people who've been through this before you. Nope, it's all over. You are not alone. You are not the first person that this has ever happened to. There are people out there who have survived this. You can get through it.
Welcome to the I Am Wiser podcast, where the biggest questions in healthcare and wellness meet the collective wisdom of industry leaders and innovators. I'm Dr. Laura Purdy, and here we explore the intersections of AI, care delivery, telehealth policy, and more through the lens of those who are reshaping healthcare. This is not just about theory, it's about lived experience and real industry insights. Let's dive in and get wiser together.
Oh, goodness. This one has been a long time coming, and I'm ready to tell the story of what was one of the professionally most traumatizing experiences of my entire life, as well as disillusioning, alarming, frustrating, and eventually, after I made my way through it, empowering experiences that I've ever been through. So, when you become a doctor, you go through medical education. It starts with your undergraduate, you get a degree, and then you go to medical school for 4 years, and then you go to residency, which can be as little as 3, mine was 3, and up to 7, 8, 9, 10, however many years of school you need to go through in order to become a doctor. And the healthcare industry is very contentious. It is a painfully traumatic way to be educated on how to do anything. And I do think since I was in education, I'm sure things have gotten a little better. But for the longest time, there really was a break people down to build them back up mentality. And the doctors that I knew when I was in training would eat each other alive for the sake of training and education. And one of the ways that doctors abuse each other is by instilling fear into them to tell them, you're going to get sued, you're going to lose your license, you're going to, all these bad things are going to happen to you and it's inevitable. And it really instills a culture of fear into you. And a lot of medical education is really subjective. If people don't like you or they don't like how you are or they don't like who you are, they have the power and the capacity to fail you and to really ruin and damage your career. So that's the foundation that sets this tone for this story that I'm going to tell you. So after I left the military, I started working in the innovative care industry. I started working at MD Live, which is like telemedicine. So one of the oldest telemedicine companies in the United States. I was the first full-time physician there, became a practice medical director. Then I worked at Hims and Hers. I was one of the national medical directors. And during that time, and that started in 2017, so this was before COVID, before everybody in all of America jumped on the bandwagon and decided they wanted to become rich and famous off of telemedicine, which is the direction that the industry has gone in the last maybe 2 years. But I started working in this industry because I wanted to spend more time at home, but I needed to make more money because I was in the military, and military doctors don't make a whole lot of money. And I had a bunch of kids to provide for. So started working in telemedicine, working at these companies. And then during 2020, when the pandemic hit, I was in the position to where I was able to start my own virtual private practice. And the reason why I did that is because I've been fired a lot. I've been fired a lot from large companies. I've been worked into the ground, absolutely burned completely out. So the same problems that exist in institutional healthcare exist in corporate telehealth as well. So I've been worked into the ground, burned out completely. I can remember times when I had a newborn and was up at 5 a.m. taking phone and video calls all the way up until midnight, taking phone and video calls with a newborn and 2 children. I mean, this was a very real part of my life that I lived for several years while I was building my career. And I have never had the mentality that a lot of people do in telemedicine, which is try to get as rich as possible and who cares what happens in the process. I've always cared a lot about what I do. I've always cared a lot about the success of the businesses that I work for. But consequently, I have been fired a lot. I mean, nurse practitioners tend to be cheaper than physicians, and most companies don't tend to want to accommodate you when you're getting burned out. And I even had one instance where I wasn't really respected as a woman or as an executive, and I had to make the decision to leave because of sexism in the workplace in 2022. So I decided that the only person who will never fire me is myself. And I needed to start to build a safety net so that I could make sure as these gig jobs came and went, that I would still be able to provide for my children. And this was in the COVID and immediately post-COVID era when telemedicine weight loss was starting to explode. This was around the time Wegovy hit the market and a couple of years before Zepbound hit the market. And in the first few years of the weight loss boom, I had already started to establish a virtual primary care clinic, which was mostly urgent care, especially during the really bad influenza season that happened before COVID. And then during COVID itself, people had nowhere to go. They had nowhere to turn. Their doctors were closed. They couldn't get care. They couldn't get refills, even for things like sinus infections or basic colds, medication refills, insulin refills for some people who were diabetic. The emergency room was not an option. The PCP was closed. All the what did they call it? Non-essential services like dermatology was closed, but people still needed healthcare. And my clinic at the time, I was licensed in all 50 states, and I could see patients from all across the country. Rural, urban, wherever they were, I could see them from coast to coast. So I started attracting a lot of people from all over the country who had varying access to medical resources. And at the time, medical weight loss was exploding. So my primary care patients and my urgent care patients started to ask me about medical weight loss. I didn't know much about it. At that time, Ozempic was the only thing, and Rybelsus were the only ones that existed. And I really didn't understand a lot about the prior authorization system because I had always worked for TRICARE. And if you have never worked in the United States health insurance reimbursement sector, if you've never worked in it, it's impossible to understand it. It's not taught in medical school. It wasn't taught in military medical school. It definitely wasn't taught in military residency. And I never encountered it in 7 years of military practice. So I was trying to learn about weight loss medicine. I was trying to learn about prior authorizations. I was trying to learn about how all of this worked. And it was pretty easy because at the time only Ozempic existed. But one of the complexities of working in the telehealth industry is that you have to understand the topic of the modality that is required for the establishment of the doctor-patient relationship. And that's the key because there are 50 states and then you have Puerto Rico, Washington, D.C., and I guess whatever the other territories are. And each one of them has a different law. So medical regulatory affairs are dictated at the state level, unless you work at a federal institution. And even still, the state still controls your ability to practice medicine. There is no such thing as a federal medical license. So I had to go through the process of all 50 states doing 50 different applications and 50 background checks and 50 fingerprints and 50 peer letters and 50 verifications of all the other states. It's a huge process, very painful, very time expensive, it's annoying. But at the time, I was practicing in all 50 states. And I even had attorneys that I was working with to try to help me understand the laws and what the states said I had to do to be able to legally establish the doctor-patient relationship. I have always been cash pay. I have never credentialed my primary care clinic to work with payers. This is just very simple. Patient pays me money for a consultation. Myself or one of the other doctors or nurse practitioners in my clinic evaluates them, and then there is a disposition. It might be a prescription. It might be a lab. It might be a referral to in-person care, but there's no third-party payer. The patient is the payer. So as we look at all 50 states, we have to decide, how does the state say I can legally have a valid doctor-patient relationship, which is the basic minimum standard in order to be able to write a prescription or a lab in the state. And to give you some basic terminology, it can be synchronous, which means real-time, two-way dialogue. I talk to you, you talk to me, we talk to each other at the same time. You can do that through audio visual, which means phone and video, or it can be audio only, which is just over the phone, or through some sort of other audio delivery device. And then you can have what's called asynchronous, which is what you think about with chat-based care, where I chat you, you're not at your computer or you're not at your portal, and a little while later you chat me. And through the dialogue that we have, in addition to probably some stored intake forms, which they call store and forward, you can still dialogue and communicate with the patient, but it's not happening in real time and you can't see or hear each other. And in a lot of states, that's actually a valid establishment of a doctor-patient relationship. So I had several attorneys that I worked with, and at the time, I actually had access to several lengthy legal roll-ups done by legal teams that worked with companies that I was affiliated with. So I would go through these documents and I would say, okay, if we are going to practice in the state of California, here's what the state of California says we have to do in order to have a valid establishment of doctor-patient relationship. Some states even require their patients to have once a year physical appointments where they go visit someone in person. Every state is different, and it's important to understand what the laws say. So in our clinic, our job is to know what that establishment doctrine says so that we can follow it. But the interesting thing about state medical regulatory authorities is that they are self-appointed, self-governing, self-accountable, regulating, and a lot of times they're a completely closed circuit with no ability for anyone outside of their close-knit circle to be able to impact what happens inside of it. Now, before I proceed, I want to say a couple of things to make sure we are understanding what I'm trying to do here. I am going to call out some states by name. I am not here to criticize the states. I am not here to talk bad about states or to slander the states. But to be fair, you guys wrote the story, and I'm going to tell the story because this was a very real story that I lived through, had to survive through, had to overcome, and then had to figure out how to pick up the pieces to move forward with my life and my career. So, as I tell the story, I want you to understand that I come from a place of deference, respect, and authority for the state regulators. I acknowledge your position as the issuers of medical licenses. I acknowledge your position as the people who write the rules. I respect them. I pay attention to them, and I do exactly as they say within my ability to understand the interpretation of them. But that being said, I do have a right to tell the story of the events of May 2023 in the most factual and unbiased way that I possibly can. So I am going to tell the story. I am going to name the names of the states that are involved in the story. I will not name the names of the people, but I think that other licensees and other doctors have a right to understand the nuances of the medical regulatory environment that they choose to work in. So it is a cautionary tale. It is an opportunity for me to explain what happened so that maybe other people can avoid it. And maybe, just maybe, the states that I discuss will hear this someday and maybe make different choices in the future that are less unnecessarily harmful to the people that they are making the choices about. So let's tell the story. So in the summer of 2022, I received a phone call from a patient, and she was in the state of Mississippi. And I'm going to say it one more time, Mississippi. Like I told you in May of 2023, I have love in my heart for the people of the state of Mississippi, and I have respect in my heart for the medical regulators in the state of Mississippi. This story is not meant to slander. But that being said, in the summer of 2022, A patient from Mississippi called me and she was crying. And she said, Dr. Purdy, I am so sorry. I went to see my PCP and I told him that I was in your virtual clinic, and I was telling him because I felt like my doctor needed to know who I was talking to and who I was seeing outside of him. And he got upset. And he told me that I shouldn't be seeing a virtual doctor and that he was going to report you to the medical board. And he really upset me and he made me cry. And I said, you know what? That's okay. Let him do it. I feel comfortable and confident in the care that I've provided you. I feel comfortable and confident in our doctor-patient relationship. And this has nothing to do with you. So don't be upset. Don't be hard on yourself. And please, by all means, relieve yourself of this guilt. So a couple months went by. And indeed, I did get a subpoena for medical records from the Mississippi Board of Medicine. And they said, here are the names of three patients that you have seen and treated in the state of Mississippi, and we demand that you send us their medical records. And so I opened up my medical record and I'm looking through them. And at the time, my attorney had advised me that the Mississippi Establishment of Doctor-Patient Relationship Regulations for Mississippi stated that the doctor may choose to use technology to gather enough information that would be sufficient to allow them to make a medical decision in the same way that they would in office. It did not expressly say that it must be done by video, and it did not expressly say that it could not be done by chat. It was a gray area, and my attorney agreed with me at the time that it was interpreted as such. So I went to my medical record and I saw these three patients. They were all weight loss patients, and I believe that they all probably belong to the same PCP's office. Now, in the interest of not harboring negative sentiment towards another person, I have never sought to find out the name of this individual. I don't know who he is, don't want to know who he is, and I hope I never find out because I don't want to harbor those types of negative thoughts towards another person. So I went to my medical record and I found that I had 81 pages. That's right, 81 pages, if you exported the chart and pulled it out. 81 pages of back and forth, non-real-time, two-way dialogue. So it wasn't a video, wasn't audio, but it was 81 pages of chat. And keep in mind, the patient, like I said, she did actually call me and we did have a phone call after the fact. So she was able to call me if she wanted to, but we had been engaging through this non-real-time back and forth two-way dialogue, 81 pages over the course of three patients. So it was quite a bit of dialogue. One of those three patients never actually received a medication at all. So she wasn't taking anything. So I collected all of the records as the subpoena requested. I had them sent in. They called me. They wanted me to do an interview. I did it. And about 8 months went by and I didn't hear anything. The investigator was actually very courteous. He was a kind man. And I've learned in hindsight that that's kind of something that they do on purpose. They allow their investigators, and I think they even coach and teach them to be kind, because if they are mean, then you might be defensive and not want to be as helpful. So he was very kind. And I felt like everything was okay. I thought things were going well. And then in March or April of 2023, so several months later, I got an order demanding that I appear before the Mississippi Board of Medicine for an in-person administrative hearing. And attached to the back of that order was a proposed stipulation consent order. So a consent order is when a medical board and you agree, it's like a settlement, you agree that they want to discipline you in this way, and you agree that it's okay for them to discipline you in this way, and you go on about your business. So the proposed consent order was a 12-month suspension of my license. And I read that and I thought, this is insane. This is absolutely insane. And what on earth have I done to warrant a 12-month suspension on my license? And I actually went onto the Mississippi Board of Medicine website and I read every single board action. I said, do they really actually punish people to that severity for things like this? This is crazy. And I looked at every board action for the last 2 years. I read every single one of them. And we're talking about people who are touching their patients inappropriately, doctors who are toxic narcissists that are physically hurting people, doctors who have inappropriate relationships with children, okay, the types of things that you go to jail for, doctors who are abusing narcotics and abusing fentanyl and doing drugs and having DUIs and actually doing injection narcotics when they're supposed to be anesthesiologists in the hospital doing surgery, talking about people getting DUIs or theft, civil crimes. We're getting punishments that were not as severe as the one that they were proposing to me. So I called my attorney and I said, there's absolutely no way. There is no way that I'm going to just roll over and agree to Mississippi to take away my license for 12 months for what? For what? Not doing a video? I mean, this is insane. So I agreed to go to court. So the third week of May in 2023, I showed up to the Mississippi Board of Medicine and I walked right in there and allowed them to hang me out to dry for an hour and a half. So let me paint the picture for you. I walk into this courtroom and there is a circular panel of 12 individuals. They were all probably in the last 10% of their career, and admittedly, none of them had ever done telemedicine before in their life. They made it a point to tell me, I've never done telemedicine, but, right? They did not know who I was, and they had not been provided with those 81 pages of back and forth dialogue evidence until the moment I showed up and it was passed around by my attorney. So from my perspective, they had already shown up to this event deciding what they were going to do with me, right? So I sat on the stand, I had an attorney. Their board lawyer made some opening remarks, which reflected several inaccuracies, just straight up blatant inaccuracies. And by the way, this was recorded and it was available on YouTube and it was online for quite a while. They pulled it down. I don't know why, but there is a recording of this entire court case that's available somewhere. And I'm sure that everything that I'm saying would be shown to be true if the video were reviewed. So there were several inaccuracies in the board's opening lawyer's defense. Or not defense, but what would the word be? Their opening argument, I guess. I was the one who was on the defense. And they had accused me of conduct intended to deceive, defraud, or harm the public, simply because I had not done a video. So I got on the stand and they grilled me for an hour and a half. One of the most ironic things was that every single one of them thanked me for my service, because I did, when I was in the military, take care of the Mississippi 155 National Guard as it demobilized from their deployment overseas. And one of the things that they asked me is, have you ever treated a Mississippi patient? And I said, absolutely. I've taken care of Mississippi soldiers when they came home from war. And I helped them to get care through the VA. And I helped them when they were very broken. And so, yes, I have love in my heart for the people from Mississippi. And of course, they thanked me for my service as they hung me out to dry. So after they finished, so they put me on the stand, they asked me all kinds of questions. One of them accused me of clinical gaze. And he said, Dr. Purdy, have you ever heard of clinical gaze? And I said, I have never heard of clinical gaze. Please tell me what that is. And he said, clinical gaze is something that as you ascend in the ranks of an administrator, this is paraphrase, by the way, and you start to have higher levels of administration, you start to see patients as less and less human and more of just a number. And we are concerned at you having clinical gaze. And I said, okay. And I said, well, I have no evidence in my practice or in my life that I don't feel that way towards patients. In fact, I very much care about them, as evidenced by the patient who called me in tears when her PCP reported me. She feels like I feel like she's a human, and I feel like she feels like she's a human. But thank you for your interesting comment. Then another doctor said to me, Dr. Purdy, we've had several patients from the state of Mississippi who wrote letters in support of you continuing to practice medicine in Mississippi. What's your plan? Do you still want to take care of patients in Mississippi? And I actually cried. I lost my composure for 2 seconds because I felt moved by compassion for the fact that these patients would actually stand up for me. And it was quite clear that the board did not feel the same way that I did, because they really kind of dismissed the comments. And I told them, I said, you know what? It's not about me. This is not about me providing care in Mississippi. This is about me increasing access to care for the patients in Mississippi. And I've already found other doctors with Mississippi licenses who can get in there and take care of these patients. And some of them have said they want to wait for me until which time I choose to come back or you allow me to come back. But I am going to make sure that they are taken care of, and I'm not going to abandon these patients. So they also showed me, the report that was made by the PCP, the rural PCP in Mississippi. And again, I still don't know who his name is, and I don't want to know what his name is. I don't care who he is. But what he said in his report to the Mississippi Board of Medicine was, this type of care might be legal, but I don't like it. He never called me. He never attempted to reach out to me. He never attempted to consult me or to have a conversation with me about his patients. Rather than be collegial and work together as a team, because we all want the same thing, right? We all want good care for our patients. He chose violence, for the lack of a better word. He chose to try to harm me instead of try to work with me to help his patient. So they interviewed me for an hour and a half. They thanked me for my service. You're welcome for the service. And then they dismissed me while they went back into their chambers and underwent a private deliberation. And then I went to the bathroom and threw up. I was so sick. I mean, it was nauseating. It was one of the most terrifying and gut-wrenching, horrific days of my life because I love my job. I love what I do. I love working in telemedicine. At that time, I was licensed in all 50 states, and I knew what it would mean. I knew that I had to report this to all 50 states. And again, like I said at the beginning, when you go through a medical education, people instill fear into you. And they say, if you get in trouble, it's over. You're going to get sued and it's going to be over. The medical board is going to take away your license and it's all going to be over forever and your life is going to be ruined. Ugh. Nobody ever tries to help you and say, there are resources available. There are people who've been through this before you. Nope. It's all over. So there I am in the bathroom, puking my guts out. I'm throwing up everywhere. I'm like holding on to the wall and trying to get myself together. I didn't even have a Zofran. I should have brought a Zofran, but I was a mess because I had no idea what was going to happen. And I waited in the lobby for them to call me back in. Now, remember, I told you a few minutes ago that the main reason why I went to court to begin with is that they proposed a 12-month full suspension of license. And I said, that is not fair. Objectively, based on the other people that you have chosen to take away the license for 12 months, I'm not like them. Nobody was harmed. The patient isn't even who reported it. It was the PCP who didn't like it, even though it was legal. So, So I come in to the chamber where they file back in and they sit down, and a couple of them have smug grins on their faces. Objectively speaking, they were grins and they were smug. And I could tell that something was going to happen. So they get all, formal, and somebody's got the little piece of paper, and he stands up and says, Dr. Purdy, we've decided to read the following stipulations. Here we go. And the good news is that they did not suspend my license for 12 months. They didn't. And that was the first thing I heard. And the relief that I experienced in that moment when I heard that they were not going to suspend my license for 12 months was progress. And it was unbelievable. And I'm very grateful to this moment. Thank you, Mississippi, for not taking away my license for 12 months because it would not have been fair. And I would absolutely have appealed it. using your own discipline history as precedent. But they did decide that because I had not done a video visit and their interpretation of their law as applied in 2021, even though I had changed 3 times since then, their interpretation of their own law that they wrote was that a video was mandated and that 81 pages of back and forth non-real-time two-way dialogue was not enough to establish a valid doctor-patient relationship. And therefore, I had violated the Mississippi Professional Code. Now, when a self-governing, self-autonomous, self-appointed, self-accountable, self-regulating body decides to discipline you, they have to use one of the statutes that they wrote as justification. Now, you can imagine Mississippi in 2023 did not have a regulation that was written that applied directly to this thing, and they had to pick one. So the one that they picked was I was guilty of conduct intending to deceive, defraud, or harm the public, even though nobody was deceived, nobody was defrauded, and nobody was harmed except for the PCP's feelings, let's be honest. So they said, Dr. Laura Purdy, you are guilty of this thing. We're going to make you take a mandatory ethics course. Okay, I like ethics. We are going to make you write a telemedicine SOP. That's fine. I have them anyways. We are going to give you a 3-month suspension stayed. So legal speak, stayed means we suspend you, but we void it, or it's a suspension on paper, but it's not a suspension in practice. Okay, fine. I'll take that. That's about as hard of a slap on the wrist as I could ever imagine. And then the last piece of it was, and we also request that you not practice telemedicine for 30 days, or was it 90 days? I don't remember if it was 30 or 90 days. It might have been, I think it was 30 days, or until we have approved your SOP. And I said, okay, great. Sounds good. It was still sad. It was still hard, but I did actually feel very victorious walking out of there because it wasn't a 12-month suspension and it felt more fair. However, both me and my attorney were under the impression that this was not going to result in a public reprimand. And they did actively lead us to believe that that was the case because my attorney and I, he had driven me to the event. We had a conversation in the car on the way out of there, and we both understood it to say that they were not going to make it a public reprimand. Mississippi has one of their options at their disposal, a private reprimand. And I'll tell you how I know that in just a minute. But we thought that they were going to choose a private reprimand, which would be great because a private reprimand is not something that is reportable in all 50 states if you have a medical license in all 50 states. A public reprimand would be. So I called my other attorney. I have lots and lots of attorneys. And I said, okay, remember how we thought we were going to have to do 50 state reporting? We don't have to do it because they led us to believe that it's not going to be public, that it's just going to be private. And I have to take this ethics class, write this SOP, and request not to do telemedicine for 30 days, and we're fine. And he said, okay, because we had prepared notification letters for all 50 states, and we were going to send them out that day. Okay, we were going to send them out right away if we thought this was going to go public on their website. So I left all that. I went home. It felt great. I was really happy. Yes, there was a little something on my record, but I felt like it was as fair as it possibly could have been. I continued to check, however, the Mississippi Board of Medicine website. I checked it every few days. I asked the attorney, have you heard anything? Is there anything for me to sign? Because they did say that they were going to send me that document that they read me. They said they were going to send it to me to sign. So my attorney's following up with them over and over again. I'm following up with them over and over again. We're waiting, and nothing happens. I even have a screenshot with a date time stamp from 29 or 30 days after this court thing happened. And there was no public action on the Mississippi Board of Medicine website. It has a date time stamp on it. Nothing was there. 2 days outside of the mandatory reporting window, the Mississippi Board of Medicine posted a public reprimand that was backdated by 32 days. So they posted it in a way and at a time that by default, I was already late in notifying all of the other 50 states. So we reached out to them and we asked them to amend it. We asked them to change the date. We asked them to update it because they only sent it to me to sign the day before, right outside of the reporting window. And they said no. They said, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to change the date. We're not going to change it at all. And they actually had to send it to me to amend it again because they left out the ethics course. So they sent it to me to re-sign, but they didn't change the date on it. And they set me up for failure, quite frankly, because most of the states that I had license in at the time required me to report it within 30 days. We had the letters ready. They were addressed. They were going to go out. But if there was no discipline and if there was nothing signed, what is the point of reporting something that doesn't exist? So they set me up for failure. And actually, in several states, I did receive additional discipline because it was reported outside the window, but really it was filed outside of the window. But as we've learned, self-accountable, self-governing, self-appointed, self-involved, self-enclosed societies of medical regulators, they only answer to themselves. And there's no higher authority that can make them do anything. And if they don't want to, they don't have to. So fast forward 2.5 years. I'll kind of speed up the end of the story. The end of the story is they posted it 32 days late. We immediately went about notifying all 50 states. We sent a letter to every 50 state and said, this is what happened. I took the ethics course and I did my SOP, and my Mississippi medical license was reinstated, even though it was never suspended, by August of 2023 and is still in good standing as of today. However, all 50 states get to decide what they want to do with you. And again, self-governing, self-appointed, self-accountable, self-regulating regulators, and they get to decide what they want to do. There were several states that took no action. The state of Washington sent me many, many, many letters saying, you didn't do anything wrong here. You did nothing wrong here. And we have no problem with what happened to you. But there were other states that chose to make me take mandatory courses. There were other states that chose to fine me tens of thousands and tens of thousands of dollars. I had to take mandatory classes. I mean, the amount of money that was paid in the course of all of this is beyond what you would even imagine. However, and there were even actually a couple states that in their reciprocal action, which means they had to make a choice because of, they have like a reflexive knee-jerk action because of what happened in that state of Mississippi. Their reciprocal action was, they said, we don't want you to practice medicine anymore. And I said, that's okay, right? So to fast forward, the end of the long story is that I am still licensed in many, 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 many states. There are some states that are so contentious that I would never recommend anyone practice there. And I'm not going to say what those states are here because the intent is not to slander anyone. But if you're a doctor or a nurse practitioner or someone who's been reported to your medical authority, what I would tell you is this: you are not alone. You are not the first person that this has ever happened to. You are not the last person that this will ever happen to. There are people out there who have survived this. It is not a career ender. It is not a life ender. You can get through it. You need good legal support and you need a good team to help you navigate it. You need good emotional support and you need to have a backup plan. You need a license in multiple states, especially if something like this happens to you, and you need to know what your plan is. So that's the story. I'm glad I finally got to tell it, and hopefully you've learned something from this, and I'll see you next time on our next episode.
Thank you for tuning in to the I Am Wiser podcast, where each episode brings us closer to a wiser, more human approach to healthcare. If today's conversation inspired you or sparked new ideas, share it with someone who's ready to rethink healthcare. And if you have a story or innovation that could light the way for others, reach out. We'd love to hear from you. This space is yours too. Don't forget to follow, rate, and review us on your favorite platform. Until next time, stay curious, stay courageous, and stay wiser.